So it is July 4th. Shocker, I'm going to talk about freedom. And shocker, it might be there might be a few hiccups or speed bumps along the way. Because I don't want to talk about freedom in a typical, maybe an expected kind of way. I want to talk about freedom in the context of not historically, but today. And like, let's dig a little deeper into what it means. We we have a tendency to kind of look at it halfway, kind of look at freedom in half a picture kind of process. So the first thing I want to do is when you hear the word freedom, or you hear me say it, or even the word liberation, because I'm going to say a little bit about that as well. But what comes to mind? And put it in the chat. What comes to mind when you think about the word freedom? Or even it's Independence Day, right? Here in the United States, it's Independence Day. And I use the term in quotations on purpose because we know it's not really everybody's, but something we have to work at and work for and be conscious of. So I just want to, first of all, see what comes to mind. Don't worry, there's not a quiz, there's not a test, there's nothing. I'm not waiting for a right answer. It's just when you hear freedom, what comes to mind? And then just type that into the chat, because I like to read that. I want to see that. I want to engage with that. What I tend to do is when I know that there's something that I want to talk about, and freedom is really, frankly, is a pretty big word. If people are typing into the chat, we'll probably wind up with multiple descriptions or multiple definitions, or just lots of different ways to think about freedom and how it shows up. But it is one of those kind of big overarching conversations and topic. And so, of course, me being a nerd, so to speak, or a word geek, I'm going to go to the dictionary. It's one of the places I go to. I also go to look at the etymology of the word. I want to see the roots of the word. How did a word come into being? Because very often when you look at the etymology, or how a word came to be, its origins, you get a whole lot more information. You get this wonderful story, about a word. So I did that, of course, with the word freedom. I go to the dictionary and I think I know what it means. And that's the other reason I go to the dictionary, because I think I know what it means and I'm convinced I know what it means. And so, but let me go see what Merriam-Webster has to say, or the Oxford Dictionary, just out of curiosity. And when I look at it, it's that, of course, like lots of words, you get multiple definitions. So one of them is the absence of coercion or constraint, either in choice or in action. Of course, there's the liberation from slavery or restraint. It's, the liberation or the absence of power of another, like power over another. But there is also a definition in there that that if you know me, you might chuckle a little bit when I tell you my favorite one. And my favorite one was the quality of being frank, open, or outspoken. The quality of being frank, open, or outspoken. And I'm sure if you asked my mother, she would right now probably be laughing hysterically and choking that's my favorite one. Because it isn't because we have this idea in our country about freedom of speech, which is, yes, it's on paper. I'm not sure how much we actually really embrace that and have that. But we do generally think of freedom as a release from a restraint, as a release from a burden. So in unity teaching, in unity principles, we might think of freedom as we often, practice in our prayer practices, in our healing practices, the release of, particular thoughts or lightening our load. And not untrue, I just think it keeps what freedom really is and what that's about kind of small. The title is freedom is our responsibility, and that's sort of like a reminder. It's not it's an our thing. It belongs with us all. It's all of our responsibility. It's not just me and it's not just you. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. But it's when I think about that, when I think about freedom, and of course, I'm going to go with the quality of being frank, open, or outspoken, because that's for me. um, Really an essence of freedom, that you have to be outspoken, you have to be open, you have to be frank. Freedom is not a we're not solitary creatures. There are parts of our brain that only light up when we're by ourselves, and doing individual tasks. But there are other parts of our brain that only light up, that only work, so to speak, but that only light up and become active when we're with other people. So if we are not with other people, if we are not engaged in communal activity, whatever that is, whether it's like a picnic today, I can hear people having lots of communal activities over the weekend. It might be like this, right? Being in community together in a spiritual community. It could be you're at a march. It could be you're at a parade. It could be, excuse me, that you're um, engaged in some social justice work. She was, read in my bio about an embodied social justice activist that's is certified. That's communal work, right? And social justice doesn't mean protesting and arguing and all that. Justice is another word for loving awareness in action. So embodying the loving awareness in action, which is freedom to me. Because I think of freedom as, that part. So part of our brain that only lights up when we're together is means that we are biologically designed to be together. We are biologically designed to be in community, to do, to live this life together. So of course we have our individual work. Of course we have our own prayer work. We have our own healing work. We have in our own celebration and joy work. We can certainly celebrate on our own. If you're somebody who loves a good bubble bath, that's pretty celebratory. May not have all the hoot and holler as other kinds of celebrations, but it's certainly gratitude, right? The you know great fullness of our life. It may be, maybe you're cooking, you love cooking, you're doing that on your own, there's joy in that. So there's certainly um, you know, the elements of our life that are individual. But I want to talk about freedom in terms of, we are hardwired to be together. We are hardwired to be in community. We are hardwired to do freedom together. Um, so when I think about that, of course, then I go, well, okay, good thought. Sounds like a good theory, Kelly. But what does that mean? Freedom. Freedom from what? Or maybe you've heard the term claiming our freedom. Claiming, and what is that we're claiming, right? That's why I kind of asked before of, what's your definition of freedom? Um, uh, what comes to mind when you hear the word freedom? And so there's a few things in the chat. Release of thoughts, yeah. Freedom of speech, freedom to move safely around the world, liberty, having choices, unbound, um, frank, yeah, open and frank. Freedom to me is being connected to spirit and following guidance without restraint. Yeah, that's a really important piece, the without restraint. Um, the word freedom Nancy says, is making me sad because I don't believe every individual has the same freedoms. And I agree with you, Nancy. I think we like to think that, or it may be on paper, but not really. Um, so freedom from what? Right? Or what freedom am I claiming, or what are we claiming? We do have, we like to think we have unlimited freedom to think as we choose, which I think largely we do. And in doing that, what is it we're thinking? What is it we're feeling? And that in part supports what I have in my life. You ever have any look around at your world, look around at your life, whether it's people or things or experiences or, whatever you're doing, and you wonder, there might be one or two things or a few things where you're like, well, how did that get there? Right? Like like for me, I'll use an example of myself. Somehow or another, and I joke with friends about this, that I seem to attract um, difficult people, right? And or difficult people, I guess attracts the word, but difficult people that show up. And by difficult, I don't mean that necessarily they're I don't want to be around them, but difficult in terms that they have difficulty in their life. They have challenges in their life. And there are moments every once in a while when it seems like I, have what I think is more than my fair share. And I'm like, really? Like, what? Did I really bring this in? Because we have the freedom to think and feel what we want. We have the freedom to believe what we want. And what's really fascinating about that is that we talk and we teach about infinite possibilities, right? Infinite number of things I can think, infinite number of things, divine ideas that I can imagine, an infinite, never ending, inexhaustible supply. But what's interesting about that is the brain can't really wrap itself around the idea of infinite. So then freedom sort of, takes on a different connotation, a different meaning. For me, where I've sort of landed with freedom and uh, that it's really a state of consciousness. It's really a state of mind. It's really an activity. So it's not just a state of consciousness, it's how I'm being. Because again, for me, remember, we're doing this communally. So freedom becomes something made manifest by how I'm living, right? Freedom becomes obvious. Freedom becomes something you see. Freedom becomes something we experience based on how I'm living, not just what I'm thinking and feeling, right? We teach our thoughts and feelings. It's not just thoughts create your world, it's our thoughts and feelings. We actually feel first and think after. Uh, that creates our world. And then I go out in the world, right? It's easy to be spiritual in a cave, right? But I go out into the world. So where I'm at and the affirmation that I would give you, or a little nugget to hold on to is this statement that my freedom is in living by spiritual insight. My freedom is living by spiritual insight. And that's the kind of my rudder in a way, because I know my freedom is also dependent on another. I think it's totally fascinating that we have this, it's called Independence Day, and yet how independent are we really? I don't think so much. I think what we navigate through as in our world is being dependent and being independent, and really I believe my freedom lies in our interdependence. No matter how much I may, on my really not good days where I just want to like go away, world, I'll forget that we are interdependent. That means my life depends on your life, and your life depends on my life. So my freedom is completely connected to your freedom and vice versa. Your capacity for knowing freedom is completely, connected to mine. It doesn't mean, we can't know freedom. Who was it? Fannie Lou Hamer said that, oh, how did she put it? What did she say? That we can't know, no one knows freedom until everyone knows freedom. So if you don't know, Fannie Lou Hamer was, she rose from, she was in Mississippi, very passionate, outspoken, one of the very few first Black woman, very powerful voice around civil rights and voting rights, and really a leader in greater economic opportunities for African Americans. And this was back in the 40s and 50s. But she said, nobody's free until everybody's free. And I think she's right, it's not an either or thing, though. That's what's really important, which is why I use that my freedom is living by spiritual insight, right? So what is insight? So I want to know freedom, right? But I also know that my having a sense of freedom, that all those things that everybody said, this is, I think, one of those, like the word oneness, right? Whose definition are we using? But I think freedom, the definition of freedom is really, in part, very individual. So how do you define it? So my freedom is living by spiritual insight. So it's always expressing, it's always emerging. it's kind of a verb, really, oftentimes more than a noun, an experience I'm having. Well, there's two elements to spiritual insight for me. The first is recognizing that we are fully human and fully divine. And I need to embrace them both. I need to understand them both. I need to embody them both. Oftentimes in religious teachings, and sometimes every once in a while I hear it in unity, that we are supposed to free ourselves from this lower world of being human, and then recognize our citizenship in the higher realm, right, in our divine nature. Well, I don't agree with the first part. I'm not interested in freeing myself from, I don't consider being fully human the lower world. That's where we know freedom. That's where I can experience freedom. That's where someone who doesn't know freedom can know it through me by going inward and downward and fully into my humanity. Because what we're needing to claim is how fabulous we actually are, that we have the capacity to love, we have the capacity to be kind, we have the capacity to be grateful, we have the capacity to give, we have the capacity to lift people up, to empower them, to inspire them. We really do. We just don't own it because we don't have a sense of freedom within ourselves. There's something in our brain that stops us from full on claiming the glory of our humanity. We are glorious, glorious creatures. I would love to know that every minute of every day. I don't always, but I continue to work at it. I claim it, I own it, I speak it. And all of us, every human needs to do that because all life is glorious. All life depends on every other element of life. And if we don't know that by now, we need to wake up a little bit more. So that my freedom is in living by spiritual insight. The first thing I have to realize is that I'm made up of these, the term is called mixtus orbis, which means mixed realms. That means I'm human, right? In this human form, but I'm also divine. There's this angelic, or divine nature, or whatever word I want to use. So it's not about freeing myself from this human entity, but claiming them both. Um, so where we are is exactly where we belong. And our real purpose, our real knowing freedom, is fulfilled in the way we move back and forth between those two. So the way that I move back and forth between being fully human and fully divine, right? Because one informs the other. I think most of us know when we are not living our shiniest self, right? When we are not, when you walk away from something and you go, yeah, I could have said that differently, right? I'm like, or words are coming out of your mouth, right? And you want to grab them and put them back in, but they're just already out in the word bubble. And you're like, yeah, could have said that different, right? We all have that. So how do we, so then we're moving between being fully human and fully divine. And what we do with that is when we recognize we are not being our full humanity, which is glorious, which is our divinity in manifest form, we know to stop, right? And pay attention. And okay, if I'm being that way, not my most noble self, then there's some wounds, there's some healing that needs to happen. There's some conversation going on. I'm not free, right? There's something holding me back from expressing the fabulousness that we are. Right? That's what I mean when we talk about infinite possibilities. I don't really talk about it because the brain can't wrap itself around it. And I don't really want to, that doesn't help me out. I'm more interested in where we are is exactly where we belong. So where I am, that's my real purpose. That's the where my freedom lies, is where I move back and forth. Because as I move back and forth, being fully human, fully divine, that's how I show up here, which allows you to have freedom. The more I have, experienced freedom and being that in the world, individually, communally, and that means being frank and open and speaking up. That means speaking up when I see someone not be able to have a sense of freedom in their moment, in their day, in their life. Um, you know, Whatever that looks like. If there's someone at the grocery store, I'm going to buy this. Um, mediocre kind of loaf of bread. But what I'd really like to be able to do is buy this nicer loaf of bread. I've done this a few times before. I watch people and you can see they're having to choose something that they really don't want because of money, simply because of money. Right. So if I, in a way, can support someone and, well, here for this, if you want a tastier, nicer loaf of bread because it's going to give you a few meals that are more satisfying and you can have a sense of like releasing around worrying for a few meals, let me do that. Right. Let me do that. Um, Charles Fillmore Charles Fillmore said that the illustration of the acorn having within its heart the oak is not correct. The acorn itself is powerless to produce anything, but as an avenue through which interior forces become exterior, it is important. So what he's saying is that within the heart of the acorn is is the acorn itself is powerless to produce anything, but it becomes an avenue, right? So that's an avenue. So my freedom is in living by spiritual insight, right? To see, it's like asking a fish to point to the water, right? You can't see the water. My spiritual insight, I have to be able to see the water, right? And point to it. So it's living fully human and fully divine. And what's the mechanism, for moving between those two? The Sufis have a statement that says, "Where the two seas meet is where the true secret of our existence is revealed." Right? That idea of living fully human and fully divine, where those two meet, that's where our freedom lies. That's where the secret of our existence is revealed. So, what does freedom look like? What does it feel like communally? That's where my spiritual insight is. That's where I am that's where the directions come from, right? When I stop and pause and go, okay, what does it look like to be fully human? What does it look like to be fully divine? To bring my full divinity into this human expression? When I pause and I ask that, um, therein lies, okay, here's your next steps. That's how I know what's next to do. That's how I know what freedom looks like. Um, that's how I become passionate. That's how I become fully alive. That's how I become engaged. That's how I be with all life. Um, so, how do I practice that? Well, I got to pay attention. If my freedom is in living by spiritual insight, and my spiritual insight, right, is going to direct me into living freedom, that it's knowing that it is our responsibility, which means I got to chip in. It's an our thing. And I'm biologically hardwired for that. How do I do that? Well, the first is I got to pay attention, right? Like anything, I got to pay attention. Spiritual insight has the element of discernment. So discernment is, the practice in prayer, the practice in meditation, the moment to moment. Become a connoisseur of paying attention, right? We become connoisseurs of wine or cheese or bread, if you're like me, or, different connoisseurs for different things. So become a connoisseur of discernment, become a connoisseur of freedom, because it is our responsibility. And I make it manifest by engaging in my spiritual insight. So the first thing is to just pause, pay attention. What's going on, right? Notice where those two seas meet, because that's where we live. That's where we live it out. That's where we live our purpose. And then surrender, right? And surrender is not this outer capitulation. It's an inner opening. It's being open, right? It's trying on something different. Here's the kicker about freedom that I've discovered over time is that we can have a tendency to think about freedom as, if I have freedom, if I know freedom, then I'm going to be at peace, and things will be calm, and things will, or there'll be lots of joy, but basically there'll be harmony. There won't be upset. There won't be challenge. And guess what? It doesn't work that way. I don't think it works that way. But we have this idea of this right to comfort, right? That, oh, if I know freedom, then everything will be calm and peaceful. And it's not. It doesn't work that way. Freedom is always unfolding, it's always evolving. And to do that, we bump up against something different. We bump up against things that maybe are constraints, right? We bump up against internally, right, in our own thinking, like Why am I not, glorifying me, right? Why am I not being awesome? Because I'm bumping up against something that is a restraint, right? Think of it as handcuffs, right? I mean, it might be kind of stark for some people, but that's the idea of it. What's holding me? So surrendering, and surrender is an inner opening, which means opening to the discomfort, opening to maybe what I don't want to see, maybe what I don't want to hear. But freedom is uh, is, as Fanny Hamer said, if for me to know freedom, everyone has to know freedom, and we just don't have that right now, and we don't. We may have some principles in place. We may think that we do. We may want to, um, but we don't. Um, a representative, John Lewis, the late Representative John Lewis from Georgia, is one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. When he would talk about making noise, when he talked about good trouble, when he talked about the freedom rides, when he talked about the protests and the marches and the violence and everything in Selma and in Montgomery and Birmingham, he referred to freedom, the freedom rides, as love in action. He referred to freedom as love in action, which I think is we can take that and move forward with that, because love in action also doesn't mean smooth and calm and just no trouble at all. That's kind of a misnomer. So freedom is being willing to, at the beginning I said, being open, being frank. It's also about, part of that being open and frank is bumping up against that which is uncomfortable and trying it on, right? Am I willing to be changed by what I've been thinking? Am I willing to be uncomfortable? Am I willing to acknowledge the parts of my brain that only light up in community, in communal? And being in community and doing communal work isn't always about, nice and friendly and soft and fluffy. That sometimes our communal work is to make sure to being a voice for the voiceless, right? To seeing where is freedom not available for someone. Freedom, do they have the freedom to think what they want? Anybody does. And what access to thoughts do they have? Because that comes from our experience. So if someone's life experience is full of pain and suffering, the extent of their freedom of thought is going to be very different than someone who doesn't. Freedom comes in a lot of different forms, a lot of different forms, which is why my freedom lies in living by spiritual insight, right? Where those two worlds come together. As the Sufi said, let me put that in the chat, um, where the two seas meet, right? Where the two seas meet is um, uh, that's where our true purpose is revealed. So, talking way too long about freedom, obviously I can go on and on and on. So, let's take the idea of spiritual insight. Let's take the idea of my freedom, which really means our freedom, because we can't do this alone, lies in living by spiritual insight. So, if you're comfortable, you can close your outer eyes. And if that doesn't have a sense of safety for you, then just lower your gaze. Again, freedom. There's not one way to do this. Maybe you lower your gaze and just have a soft gaze on something. Maybe the candle you lit earlier. Freedom to shift your body in whatever way is necessary to feel the support. Maybe you want to lie down, to be in a chair. And we take a deep breath together. Inhale and big exhale. My freedom is in living by spiritual insight. Hold that in your heart for a moment. So you breathe in, breathe out. My freedom is in living by spiritual insight. And just let's take a moment and To practice that spiritual insight, just scan your body. Notice if there are places that maybe need a little tenderness, maybe need a little gentleness. Are there places, the neck, the shoulders, the back, the buttocks, the feet, knees? Just scan your body, affirming the gloriousness of it, affirming the health of your body, affirming the power in every cell to be fully lit, to be fully awake. And maybe as you gently scan, you find places that are maybe the light's not so bright. Therein lies a place of gentleness and tenderness. Therein lies a place of where our being fully human connects to being fully divine, bringing the idea of wholeness and health into the physical body, to free the cells to act in their fullest potential. And continue to breathe deeply, the freedom to breathe. Fill the belly. Fill the Buddha belly with a full breath. Where we are, right here and right now, is exactly where we belong. Right here and right now is our freedom. When we pause, when we breathe, we pay attention to our full humanity, not trying to transcend it, not trying to let it go, but living fully into it with the potential of our full divine nature. And in doing that, we are awakened to our own insights, to our own next steps, in recognizing that freedom is our responsibility, you see. Let's just hold for a moment in the quiet, just a short moment in the quiet, listening. My freedom is in living by spiritual insight. My freedom is in living by spiritual insight. And so it is. And so we go forth and we be that. Amen and amen.